The peaceful Sunday passed by sleepily and slowly, just like the drops of water hanging onto the wash drying out in the sun. Perhaps turning points into people's lives are more likely to come crashing in on those days. Around sunset, I headed back to my room and turned on the computer to find that I had received an email. I had thought it was the usual stuff from the securities firm, but it was from the Ratzinger Economics Research Center. It hit me as if someone punched me directly in the heart. I opened my email to find a short message. We have received a message from one of the sponsors of the current investment contest addressed to you, Mr. Yoshiharu Kawaura. It was unthinkable that a sponsor of this contest would be anyone other than someone involved with the financial world. Even though I was the only person here, I checked my surroundings. And then I gulped and sheepishly used my trembling hand to move the cursor to the download attachment button. Scout it. I frantically tried to downplay my expectations, telling myself that it was probably some recommendation for an investment product. Schrodinger Street. A financial district where lions, tigers, and bears gathered. It was the world of markets, both gorgeous and somehow wicked. Enormous assets only allowed for those who ran through the streets. The key to opening the doors to all of my desires could be found there. The title of the download letter was succinct. From Barton Cladwyson, head of the investment fund, the Britannica. Throwing away all my doubts, I opened the letter. What I felt at that moment was something I'd never forget. I've seen some of your skills from the investment data. I'd really like to meet you. And only that line was written briskly. It was haut and upfront. It was just how I imagined someone living in the financial district would write. I pumped my fists in front of the computer. I felt like I was about to scream out in joy. I ended up conversing back and forth 3 times over email with Barton Cladwyson, manager of the investment fund of the Britannica. I'm going to have to get used to saying that. Britannica. I was totally shocked at receiving a reply within 5 seconds of replying to the attached email address. Oh, whoops, sorry about that. I brought up the Steam page by accident. There were people in Schrodinger Street with income so high that they'd make more than 100 moles in the time it took to pick up a $100 mole bill off the street. This speedy response, as if confirming my expectations, nearly made me piss my pants. This was a feeling I had forgotten. It was something very unlike the fresh scent of detergent. It was something born out of pretty much forging the bath for 3 months, foregoing the bath for 3 months. I won't be needing dinner tonight. I said this during breakfast. Lisa looked at me, surprised, and even Hagana looked at me. Oh? Did you have plans? Going to go meet with someone. At my words, Lisa and Hagana looked at each other. A friend? Nope. I replied bluntly. I didn't want to tell Lisa and Hagana about Barton. It was my dream. It was the first step to a dream waiting for me. I see. Well, don't do anything too dangerous, okay? Even though Lisa was talking like her usual self, this time it felt irritating. There was no doubt Lisa was a grown-up woman, but she was not a grown-up man. She definitely wasn't the type to basically state her business over email to someone she's pretty much never met before, and she definitely wasn't the type to reply within 5 seconds. Newton City, with its buildings of wealth built up using arrogant steel frames, was not a place for women and children. I remembered the arrogance, and it's been a while since I thought of it. When will you be back? No idea. If it's too late, you'll get scolded by the police. I know already. Lisa sighed, as if wondering whether I really got it. However, she didn't say any more. To start with, I was merely bumming a place here, and she was simply the owner of the place. She had no right to limit where I could go or who I could meet. Hagana, who had been sitting at the opposite corner of the table, shook a bit when I called her and looked at me. Is today's trading data ready? I'll send it. Hagana replied with some uncertainty in her voice. And then, Hagana looked up at Lisa, and Lisa looked back down at her. I needed to hone myself and get rid of this soaking the day away in the bathtub feeling. I had an appointment to meet with Barton in a hotel in Newton City at 6 PM tonight. I couldn't afford to be lumped with all the sloths around here. I put all of my concentration into trading. I'll be back later. I got up from my chair as soon as trading stopped, foregoing even my usual stretching. Hagana, who had been sitting next to me, was unable to reply as she watched me depart. I threw all my belongings into my bag, ran down the hallway, jumped over the pews, and hit the exit in one go. And then, when I opened the large doors, I heard a cry from the other side. Kia! Huh? Across from the doorway was Chris, standing there and scared to death as always. Oh, it's you, Chris. What's the... The rest of my sentence was swallowed up by the large old man standing behind Chris. Is Lisa here? He had a big gut, a great beard, and overalls on, the perfect example of upstanding labourer fashion. The hand he laid on Chris's delicate shoulders looked like rubber from all the oil and manual labour. Lisa? She ain't here, but should come home soon, I think. I see. Maybe you could just wait inside. Oh, and Hagana's inside as well. I said those words to Chris, and then dashed off. Chris was about to say something to me, but I waved my hands without turning back, dashing into the amber-coloured streets. Oddly, I thought to myself, Chris wasn't carrying any baggage this time. That man behind her was probably her dad, huh? I was a bit curious about what they wanted, but in the end I didn't really care. Dude, you have just made the biggest fucking mistake of your life. Something has probably just happened. And he's like, oh, see ya. Fuck. I had to make it to the Royal Central Hotel in Newton City by 6. Taking the Lunar Development Railroad to Newton City wouldn't take more than 30 minutes. The hotel was super high-end, even on the moon, and thus could be reached with a few minutes of walking from the station. Even if I took it easy, I'd totally be able to make it, but I could not afford to be late. Furthermore, I was so pumped up, it was impossible for me to take a stroll. I flew, dashed through, and jumped, weaving my way through rush-hour traffic, and managed to launch myself through the closing doors of one of the trains. The train to Newton City was crowded, but the trains I'd see from time to time, going in the opposite direction, were even more packed, like sardines. Due to a lack of land on the moon's surface, a real house would be terrifically expensive. People who wanted to save their money and not pay the ridiculously high rent in the White Belt opted to live in the outer sections. Recently, some quite nice residential districts had been built in the outer sections, and redevelopment was proceeding. What remained was pretty much the area where Lisa's church was. The dome covering this lunar city started changing gradually from orange to deep blue in color, and the twinkling stars started showing through. At these times, due to the kind of half-hearted lighting, you could see the traces of pipes and supports used to bring the rain to the moon. From one side, you could see the orderly arrangement of buildings along the streets of the White Belt, and the orderly street lights extended all the way across to the other side. The sparkling clean lighting from the houses made it easy to imagine a beautiful dinner on top of a beautiful dining table inside a beautiful house. After some time, the train started making a gradual turn, and I could start to see Newton City in the distance. Newton City at night was a sight to see, even more so than it was during the day. On Earth, there was this phrase, $1 million view, used to refer to places that had a spectacular views at night. Here, this view was labeled as the 100 million mile view. Shining in a space like some starbase, these tall buildings could only be built here, away from Earth's gravity. The space between buildings was dark like a vacuum, and the light flowing out of the windows illuminated the skyscrapers coldly. I finally arrived at Newton City's central station, and it was more packed than usual due to rush hour. Most of the pedestrians were in suits. There were no signs of men in overalls with oily hands. There weren't that many people in rough clothing. You'd either have people dressed up in easily recognizable top-class suits, or you'd have people with messy attire and hair built with the latest mobile terminals. In either case, you could tell they worked in some of the top enterprises that comprised Newton City. The remaining people were tourists who'd set out to visit Newton City at night. Following the route I had planned before heading out, I navigated the complex and meandering routes in the station. The biggest pathway spinning east to the west, inside the central station, was adorned with gigantic ads, billboards for insurance, software, popular singers, cosmetics, investment banks, and emerald industries continued for as far as the eye could see. In front of those ads, you'd see smart and well-paid people in suits meeting up, talking on the phone, or fidgeting with their terminals. Right above the station was one of the numerous shopping malls in Newton City. The ads gave way to shop windows, and eventually you could see an entrance with automatic doors. Passing that, you'd come across shops' windows, ads, etc., that continued onwards. Mannequins that couldn't really be mimicking realistic human form wore gaudy clothing, and looked down at the commuters, seemingly with disdain. People traversing the automatic doors held many large bags, and each bag should be merchandise worth at least several thousand, if not several tens of thousands of moles. Even in the most expensive clothing from the store Hagana had haggled down with all her effort could not amount to even the sales tax on something that people here would buy to wear every day. Glancing at the scenery from the corner of my eye, I finally made it out of the building housing the station. In front of me was an open space, and a giant dizzying hologram of a blonde girl clad in a flashy outfit dancing and singing floated in midair. I jogged along the gently curved path towards the buildings on the other side. Automobiles weren't allowed up to the entrance of the station, but just a bit further down were so many multi-layered traffic circles that it would have been a pain to count. They were filled with the headlights of taxis, buses, and limousines. The gorgeousness of Newton City at night was in full swing, and it was said that you could even see this from Earth with the naked eye. On the other side of the station were governmental offices and Schrödinger Street, whereas the shopping and entertainment districts were all on this side. There were no trees like the ones randomly growing everywhere in the outer districts. There were only totally tamed trees lining the streets, and they themselves were lined with multicolored LEDs. It was quite laughable. Once you entered the area with shops for ridiculously high-class brands, the ground turned into stone pavement. The cars were also luxury vehicles imported from Earth. Cost to use the orbital elevator was determined by weight, and products such as cars carried a ridiculously high tariff. The moon didn't really have that expensive a network of roads. Even if it did, there weren't many places you'd be able to drop off and pick up passengers. Having a luxury car essentially amounted to raising a pet bug that ate away at your wealth. Around the shiny, polished red and yellow sports cars were thin women and men standing and talking. At times they'd notice me, chuckle to themselves, and go back to the conversation. I actually was in a position where I deserved being laughed at, so I didn't really care. However, 10 years later, or perhaps 20 years later, I'd be someone who could strut through these streets with his head held up high. I guess you might say telling myself this was a product of my annoyance at the situation. However, a more practical reason for this was that I needed a certain frame of mind to go forth from here, the front entrance of the Royal Central Hotel. The Royal Central Hotel was owned by the king of hotels on the moon, Ab al-Sayef. I had heard that it was a luxury hotel, where rooms started at 1,000 muls, and royal suites on the top floor were 20,000 muls a night. There was a giant fountain in front of the entrance. Luxury cars constantly passed the path to front of the foyer. Since this was also a great place for viewing the night's scenery, it wasn't a problem if random people wandered in. Even though I knew this, I was somehow nervous. It was a bit late, but I would have preferred to have worn the hoodie I bought that time at the store. Although I should have just bought something better in the first place. In the gigantic front foyer that seemed to intimidate anyone who came, doormen were lined and tended to obviously rich guests coming by. What finally gave me some relief was that I managed to mix in with a bunch of tourists who had come up on the path to the foyer. The experienced doorman smiled as he opened the door and welcomed the non-hotel guests in. Perhaps I was a bit nervous, but I felt that the doorman scratched his eyebrows at me when I passed by. I told myself that it was my imagination. Entering the hotel placed me in a huge lobby, making me feel as if I had just been ejected into deep space. I thought it was quite fascinating how they managed to get such a huge space on the moon. Even though rooms started at 1,000 muls a night, there were many guests lined up at the front counter. I looked at my watch, confirming that it was around 10 minutes before my 6 o'clock appointment. I didn't have the guts to simply walk around and browse, so I was regretting coming a bit too early. Just standing in the middle of the carpeted lobby, I suddenly heard a voice call out to me. "Is there something I can help you with today, sir?" I reflexively ended up jumping, and turned around to see a beautiful porter with a round face and her hair tied back. She was standing there, dressed in a classy uniform. "Ah, well, are you here for lodging?" she asked me with a smile. No. "I see. This hotel comes with many facilities for you to enjoy yourself. Would you like me to show you some of them?" She spoke quite politely to someone like me who obviously looked to be lacking in money. However, I finally managed to remember the reason why I came here. I wasn't some kid from Earth or the outer sections coming here to look around. I have to meet someone in the cafe on the first floor. I managed to squeeze my words out while sounding like I was hit with a bout of the hiccups. The porter lady nodded as if she received an important message, then smiled. "Understood. If you'll please follow me." And then she escorted me politely to the cafe as if I was some important government official. "This is the cafe. Please take your time." At the end, she clasped her hands together, took a deep bow, turned on her heels, and walked away. Her mannerisms were exquisite. Furthermore, as soon as I was shown to the entrance of the cafe, a waiter who had been waiting by the entrance walked quickly up to me. "Welcome. Are you here to meet someone?" "Huh? Yeah." How did he know? I puzzled over this while I saw my periphery a party being shown to the cafe by a different porter. The porter, after showing the party the cafe, made a motion with her hand behind her back to the waiter. It was probably some sort of signal. "Could you please let me know the name of the person you are meeting?" "Yeah." I came back to my senses and looked at the tall, handsome waiter. They were all tall and slim, but he was gushing with smiles. He really enjoyed their work, or perhaps it was because he had confidence in his work, and thus he looked quite cool. But Barton Cladwyson. I struggled to somehow say his name. After I did that, the waiter looked shocked for a moment before straightening his stance and returning to back to being all smiles. My apologies for my behavior. Please allow me to show you the way. I had wondered about his surprise at first, but I was more surprised at the fact that I'd only needed to mention his name. I've heard that they had to memorize the names of all the patrons who made reservations. The waiter led the way, past the properly dressed fellows, slowly sipping tea and further into the cafe. Situated in a corner of the open space lobby, the cafe had no ceiling and had a feeling of freedom. However, the cafe sloped up the farther I proceeded, and there were seats hidden from view by plants and shrubs, which cleanly segregated various areas. We walked upon the plush carpet that muffled our footsteps, past a fish tank full of bright red arowana, and then proceeded along a wall composed of potted plants with pretty yellow flowers. Finally, the waiter stopped and smiled. We have arrived. And then he turned to his side and said, The guest you have been expecting has arrived. The waiter must have been talking to Barton Cladwyson. My heart beated painfully. Oh, have him come over here. What I heard was the heavy, deep voice of a middle-aged man. I will try to memorize that then. Heavy, deep voice. Understood. Please go ahead. The waiter showed me the way, and I resolved myself to move forward. And then I turned diagonally to the left and peered into the segregated space. What I saw was a man in a suit with suspenders holding up his pants. His black hair was combed all the way back, and he was sitting in a sofa with a phone to his ear. Okay, sorry. Gotta go. I got guests, so please just handle that. Thanks. Barton then hung up the phone, placed it on the coffee table, and then stood up straight with his hands on his thighs. Yeah, he doesn't look devious at all. He wasn't that tall, but when he stood up, it was as intimidating as a whole mountain moving. He didn't have his jacket on, so the shape of his great belly could clearly be seen. A leading figure in the financial district. If I were to have drawn a picture using my imagination, it would have fit his image to a dot. And then when Barton looked at me after standing up, his smile froze for a second. Man, am I surprised. He had quite firm features compared to his figure, but it wasn't something scary. Even his wide-open arms conveyed a generosity that made me feel like I was about to get hugged. Mr. Yoshiharu Kawaora. He spoke my name with a beautiful pronunciation, a sign of his wealth. I nodded, and not willing to be outdone, stared back at him right in the eye. Yes, Mr. Barton Cladwyson. Haha, you can just call me Barton. You've done well, young investor. He suddenly stuck out his right hand. His sausage fingers, which looked almost fake due to their size, had not an ounce of oil on them. His hand was large, simple and firm, without a ring to show his wealth. When I took his hand, he grasped back almost painfully, and then grabbed my shoulder firmly with his left hand. Your body is well built. Fabulous. Thank you. I usually spend half my time down there. When I shake hands with people who've always worked on the moon, I get complaints that I was about to break their finger bones. By down there, he must have meant down on Earth. Those who proclaimed that the moon was the vanguard of the human race would refer to the Earth as down there. I guess Barton was one of them. Well, take a seat, is what I'd like to say, but... Eh? I looked at Barton and he smiled back. Aren't you hungry? You came right after trading ended for the day, right? I paused a bit before nodding. Well then, let's go have some dinner. That alright? Yeah. Actually, I traveled up from Earth today and arrived just a while back. And you know how the food on the orbital elevator is totally not suitable for human consumption. And so my email replies came pretty fast, right? Well, it was because I was bored out of my mind. He reached for his jacket, which had been thrown sloppily on the back of a sofa. I thought he was going to put it on, but instead he picked it up and threw it over his shoulder. Barton was quite dignified, in a place for VIPs in the back of a cafe belonging to the highest class hotel on the moon. In addition, he didn't need to hand money or a credit card to the waiter when exiting. Thank you for your continued patronage, and for choosing us. The waiter bowed as he spoke. There was actually something I really wanted to eat, but, how about you? Is there something you'd like to eat? No matter how I tried to paint myself as a ruffian day trader, I had to behave myself in front of this adult, as I'd easily play into the hands of even Bisa. When I could only reply in grunts, Barton slapped his big hand on my back. Hey now, you concentrating so much on your stocks that you can't think straight yet? Your eyes are all stiff, you know. He didn't go on to point out that He didn't go on to point out that it was because I was nervous. He was a broad-minded and kind, like an uncle. Well, then, should we just go with what I like? Yeah. I'd always have this when I was in New York, but for some reason, the stuff here on the moon is just tastier. Maybe it's like alloys, where the low gravity helps everything mix together. I see. I had no clue what he was talking about. Barton exited through the center of the front foyer. The doorman noticed immediately and signaled towards where all the black limousines were parked. Even if Barton took big strides, the limousine would arrive by the time he made it to the roundabout. Barton drew his chin down in satisfaction, handed the young doorman our 100 more bill, and patted him on the shoulder with his big hands. First time in a car? He said to me when I hesitated, even though the car door was open. Sullen, I got in swiftly. The car seat felt like it was about to swallow me up, and in front of me were a delicate wine glass and a small bottle of wine. There was even a car phone on the armrest. While I was dazed by the insides of the limousine, Barton shoved himself in through the opposite side, and the door closed elegantly. To the Mary Bial, please. Understood. The driver nodded at Barton's signal utterance. Shall I depart? If you please. Understood. The car started to advance slowly. At the same time, a black partition separating the driver and the rear passenger seats started to go up. Once the partition fully reached the ceiling, Barton relaxed down into the black leather seat. This was a habit of mine from when I had my own personal chauffeur. Eh? There was this time I got eavesdropped on, and information had leaked out. I thought I had given the guy not a bad pay, but in either case, let's just say that he received a pretty nice pension. Through the tinted windows, I saw the lights outside float by, as if mystically caressing Barton's face. He turned to me and laughed at me boldly. Cutthroat financial district filled with desire. I couldn't even chime in. Man, I sure was surprised at how young you were. He spoke with oddly precise timing, so as to prevent the situation from settling into silence. You didn't know? Yeah. No personal information appears anywhere in the data provided by the investment contest. The only thing that show up was your handle name for the contest. How? I had totally thought you got the name from some satellite system, but apparently you got it from your real name. The name of your investment fund. The Britannia. Is that where you're from? I somehow managed to direct it back to him. Oh, nope. I just like history. I especially liked the Victorian era. The Britannia comes from Pax Britannia. Doesn't it sound like something that could definitely collect riches? I think it sounds really cool. Yep, sounding cool is the most important. The day you named a fund, the Siberia Fund, would be the day your investment performance rose solid. Exchanging body gestures, Barton talked in high spirits. The car gradually made its way through the many bustling streets of Newton City. The pedestrians were all well-dressed, but I wondered how well-dressed they seemed to someone who ride around casually. I keep feeling like I'm about to burp, like a feeling keeps rising in my chest. It's not good. Oh my goodness. Well, there's a little one. But I wondered how well-dressed they seemed to someone who'd ride around casually in a limousine like this. But man, you really are young. How old are you? 16? I see. I'm 52. I see. 16, huh? Barton repeated the word 16 to himself a bunch of times, then straining against the seatbelt turned towards me. When I was your age, I had glasses that were as thick as the bottoms of milk bottles, and I'd do silly things like liver milk. Of course, I invested all of my earnings, but, I see. I guess one doesn't like to age. Barton murmured to himself, eyes shut. I realized it was kind of hard for me to respond, when he suddenly shot his eyes open. I saw your investment data. Marvelous stuff. Thanks. Oh, don't be so shy. Amongst the stated 50,000 investors, you're around third or fourth, right? That's a great achievement. But I'm still far from first. Yep, that is true. But it's not really something you should be worried over. Mr. Troche, right? He's from Earth, got an MBA from Harvard, and it's been unofficially decided that he'd be starting at Platina Smith. He's been called a once-in-a-decade genius over there, so don't worry about it if you can't beat him right now. When Barton said that, I was a bit surprised. How did he find all that out? The financial world is a small one. Information about those who strut the tried and true path naturally gets around. Usually, those guys have all been lured away by the big players dangling lucrative compensations in front of them. How much do you think Platina Smith would pay for an MBA brat in his mid-20s? I ended up quoting a high compensation that I had heard somewhere. 300,000 moles, perhaps? Close! A salary of 200,000 moles. Even I thought it was probably a bit high, and Barton corrected me. Plus, the bonus is probably at least 200,000 moles. If he does well, that'd go up. Beyond that, he also gets 5 free rides on the orbital elevator in first class. Riding first class on the orbital elevator, it's so ridiculous that I'd never do it out of pocket. How much do you think a one-way ride costs? I couldn't even imagine. I shook my head and Barton chuckled. One person one way is 500,000. You could build a house for that much. 100,000? And 5 rides would total 2.5 million. It's really easy to lure people from Earth using privileges on the orbital elevator. Besides, they'd surely all get annoyed of it and stop riding. Barton laughed satirically and continued. And thus the nameless rookies get called on by us minor guys. Sorry for not being staffed from the personal department of Platina Smith or E.J. Rockberg. There's no way I'd be complaining about this. I shook my head hurriedly from side to side, and Barton broke out in laughter, leaning back. Well, it's not so bad with one being one of the little guys. If you got promoted with Platina Smith, you'd find yourself mired in all sorts of internal politics. I really can't recommend them to any guys aiming to do a lifetime of trading. Oh, really? Yeah. Once you survive 5 years on Schrodinger Street, you'd earn all the money you'd ever need to live on. Beyond that, you'd really have to consider what you want out of life to pick the next stop. If it's power or fame, you'd aim to be a partner of a major investment bank. Those junkies who all get engrossed in making money wouldn't join any organization. Like me, or perhaps... Barton narrowed his eyes until his eyelids paralleled at the horizon at dawn. Like you. There's no harm in calling out to people with promising futures. Didn't I say I saw your investment data? The way you gambled in the early stages was especially great. It was when I couldn't depend on Hagana's program at all. I had to use my gut instincts. Indeed, it appears that I was the first to contact you. The reason were those trades. Huh? Organizations hate people who'd bet everything on a single stock. Even the smaller tier funds would have second doubts. For those who take big moves win big, but they also lose big. Furthermore, they also have big attitudes. Barton opened his mouth wide and laughed devilishly. Many people think playing with fire like that was a privilege of the boss. They're all bratty hotshots who got big just like that. As for me, I love doing foolish things with those reckless guys, and they like me for that. The lights outside brushed past his face, and Barton shot me with a glance with narrowed eyes. I thought to myself whether this feeling was what girls felt when they've been successfully hit on. Well, we can continue this while we eat. We're here. The car made a gentle curve and stopped in front of a restaurant. The doorman opened the door promptly, and Barton got out first. After a few words, the doorman nodded politely and sent a small message via a transmitter on his sleeve. As expected, Barton didn't need to explicitly pay for the limousine. I realized what it truly meant to have a reputation. This place has some great meats. Steak? Well, the steak sure is delicious. But didn't I say I loved history? If it's about what guys in suspenders eat in the good old financial districts, there's only one thing. Barton had his jacket on his shoulders as usual, and even though I wasn't really that well dressed, we were both greeted with the utmost respect when we entered the high-class restaurant. So, what are we going to have? Steak tartare, Barton answered me like a kid. I actually kind of like that straight shot. That's CG, sorry. I like that CG. It's just like, oh, okay, I guess I'm eating. That's cool. The meal was, to put it simply, delicious. There was no other way to describe it. Barton ordered without looking at the menu, effortlessly requesting one item after another. He drank a lot of vodka from shot glasses made from crystal, suitable for jewelry, and laughed out loud after telling me that it was great vodka, because even the pros wouldn't be able to tell the difference in taste between different types of vodka. After I had said that I'd never really had any alcohol before, I was given some soda, although the appetizer berry liqueur I had was sweet and delicious. Steak tartare is a simple dish made by mixing raw meat with various ingredients and pounding it, and it felt appropriate that it be a favorite amongst the quick-tempered and large-minded men of the financial district. We talked a bit about investments, but there was a lot of conversation on personal matters. He asked me where I lived now, whether I went to school, and what I was going to do in the future. No matter how lightly you put it, Barton had totally won me over. It was probably only that he wanted to keep close by a freak who had attained such investment performance at a young age, but for me, it was as if I had died and gone to heaven. However, there was only one phrase he didn't say. Would you like to come work for me? I thought that was perhaps it, because it was my first time meeting him. However, his handshake when we parted was enthusiastic and long. Tonight was great. I'll email you again. He even dropped me off all the way over at the main street in the 6-outer section. Around us were all trucks and personal cars, so a black limousine was totally out of the blue. I had to say, I couldn't help feeling proud of myself, letting everyone see me shaking hands with Barton in front of the limo. I watched the limo until its taillights disappeared into the depths of the streets, then pretty much skipped my way back to the church. It was already 11 o'clock. I'd likely get into a whole lot of trouble if I carelessly let myself get caught by the police, but there were still a lot of people walking around at this hour. I chose paths with as many pedestrians as possible, ran through them, and then switched over to a back alley halfway. Today was the best day of my life. And it wasn't because of some petty reason like having had Barton pay for everything. Rather, it was because I had just a small glimpse of the super high-class world of Newton City and walked its streets. The upper echelons of Newton City meant the upper echelons of human mankind. Humankind. Barton was the real deal, both in wealth and as an investor, and it was that kind of person who called out to me. I was acknowledged. While walking the quieted down residential streets, I gritted my teeth and struggled to hold back the temptation to shout out. And thus, getting into high spirits, I started jumping from rooftop to rooftop until I had arrived at the church. There, I bumped into Lisa, who looked like she was drinking at the table in the yard on the second level. Well, I wasn't really obligated to tell Lisa that I was going to be walking out late at night, but I felt a bit of guilt. However, after glancing at me, Lisa sighed, drank the wine in her glass, and then got up from her chair. Come in properly through the door. What about dinner? Already had mine. Didn't I tell you before? I know, but with how happy you looked, I was wondering if you were perhaps hungry. After she said that, my stomach did growl. I had immediately thought that I'd gotten full before, but perhaps it was just because I was nervous. I'll eat. Okay, so calm down. Having said that, Lisa returned to her room and shut the window. I did as I was told. I went down to the first floor, entered the church, and headed towards the main residence. The lights being left on had a certain tranquility to it in the early hours of the night. Lisa came down shortly and started warming up a meal from me. Where did you go? It didn't sound like she was grilling me, so I answered honestly. Newton City. To meet a friend? I gathered the reason for the pause from Lisa's slightly teasing smile on her face when she turned over her shoulder to look at me. Like I'd have friends. I figured you'd say something like that, Hal. Well then, a girl? Quit joking. You wouldn't even believe that. Okay, sorry. Lisa shrugged and returned to cooking. And then when she laid out various reheated dishes on the table, I was drawn in by the smell and came to the table as well. I guess that feeling of satedness was nervousness after all. I dug into the food greedily. I have a bad habit of prying into people's personal matters, so I would have loved to ask more, but... Digging into the pilaf, I was chomping on my food and looked at Lisa wordlessly. I'm going to stop because you'd get angry. Good choice. I nodded and Lisa poked my head lightly. Besides, I thought to myself, it wasn't like she was my mom, but she wasn't pushy, and it wasn't annoying or anything. Well, there's something else I wanted to talk to you about. I got up and looked at Lisa because she had quite a serious tone in her voice. What is it? Okay. When you left today, did you pass Chris on the way? Oh, yeah, that big-ass dude. That was Chris's dad, right? Yep, he sure was a big-ass dude. Quit copying me. Lisa laughed happily at my comment. Well, it's about that. Oh, what was that? It didn't look like a delivery. Well, you see... Lisa was squirming with her words. I collected the scattered pilaf into my mouth as I wondered what she was going on about. She was glancing left and right and then timidly spoke like Hagana. Chris's family wants to entrust to you... Wait. Chris's family wants to entrust to you their savings. What? I instantly exclaimed back, throwing rice everywhere. Lisa made a face and drew back, but I didn't care and asked her again. What did you say? Hey, watch what you're doing. Well, I heard about what you guys were doing from Hagana. I stared at Lisa collecting the rice kernels, and eventually she started spilling the beans. Chris's family also borrowed money from Toyama. In other words, you know what I'm getting at, right? Chris, who'd wear clothes that didn't fit her and would help out with deliveries while skipping out on lunch. Her family. I quickly recognized what would drive them to entrust all their money to me, as well as the pitiful state they were in. They're different from us, since they're running a business. It would be bad for their money to instantly disappear, since they wouldn't be able to restock. Besides, there isn't a single person in these parts who'd be able to pay back a loan instantly. Therefore, they figured that if it was all going to be taken away, they might as well choose a way that could potentially earn them some return. The flavor of the pilaf turned to nothingness. The pilaf had been loose and the feeling of chewing on them was great, but now it felt like I was chewing on rubber. I swallowed, drank the soup, and then said, How much? 30,000 moles? My first thought was that it was a really tiny sum. Working and saving up the money ended with a nest egg of 30,000 moles. It was as if that gorgeous world of Newton City was a lie. And the debt? 80,000. Wait, more than twice? Well, that family has really struggled, so I don't want to hear it. I know everyone has their own issues. Particularly, my hometown was full of dudes like that. It was all stories of sadness and misery and uselessness. A lot of them were so terrible they could only talk happily if they were detached from reality. Everyone was pretty much the same. If that were the case, they wouldn't have come so far as the moon, moving to and fro over a few tens of thousands of moles. And Hagana? I asked again. What did Hagana say? Hagana had second thoughts when I initially proposed trading with real money. Regardless of whether I wanted to accept the money, her opinion was more important. She said she wanted to accept it. And then Lisa continued. She said she wanted to make a difference. I was easily able to imagine her nodding with those sharp eyes and a totally serious face. Success changed people. That statement was true, but Hagana probably selflessly wanted to help Chris and thought that it would work out. Even if you accept the money, what you're doing isn't really going to change, right? Lisa asked me. She was right. Even if we were to take in other people's money, what we'd be doing would remain essentially unchanged. However, there were two problems. Whoops. There's a chance we'd lose money. I'm sure they know full well that fact. At least with this place, there was a sense of security, since there was someone like me who could put up the debt if the worst should happen. However, other people obviously didn't have an idiot squatter like me around. Slowly but surely, they'd get cornered by their debt. Well, they said that at this rate they'd clearly never be able to pay off the debt. Thus, they wanted to entrust the money to you. There's another issue. What? I had paused for a second, but told myself this was something that had to be said, and proceeded to say it. Compensation. I pronounced that word clearly, without running away. I looked Lisa right in the eye with all seriousness. As the issue of compensation, I don't plan on working for free. Lisa's expression truly changed. She looked at me with an uneasy expression, holding back a huge amount of feelings, whether it was an urge to cry or an urge to yell angrily. Compensation. That's right. I took a risk to experiment with this. It wasn't easy getting such investment technology into my hands. Furthermore, I have an agreement to pay my due share of the usage fee for Hagana's program. I don't care what Chris's family situation is. However, I won't do it without some sort of compensation. I took a deep breath and recalled Barton's dignified demeanor. An investor. It was an extremely theatrical declaration, but I didn't retreat a centimeter from Lisa. I was even prepared to get into an argument and part ways. However, Lisa slowly opened her mouth at the end of the staring contest. That compensation? How much would it come out to be? 20% of the earnings. The traditional cut hedge funds took. They'd gather money from their customers and trade accordingly to the decisions of the fund manager. They would take 20% of the earnings. At my reply, Lisa twisted her lips as if she had just eaten something bitter. You're not going to lower that any more, right? I'm not doing this to play around. She scattered her strong emotions slowly with a deep breath. Her hair, which had started to stand on end, gradually settled. And then, at the end, she slowly closed her eyelids and gave a big sigh. I got it. I'll tell them that. Of course, I'll pay Hagana's compensation from that. Yeah, I don't doubt you on that. So then, what are you doubting me on? She was about to say something, but caught herself, shut her mouth, and then smiled bitterly while refining what she wanted to say. In the name of Christ, I have to admonish avarice when I see it. I guess we'd never come to an agreement in just this life. Yep, although I also understand that you aren't just a slave to greed. At least it couldn't be someone who'd offer his own assets so easily. It was 50,000 remorse. I was truly happy that I got complimented, and my lips formed a curve. Therefore, I'm not admonishing you. Furthermore... What? You are so annoyingly mature at this moment. My face got more strained at Lisa's wry laugh. I scratched my head haphazardly and then reached for the rest of the meal. I'll handle Hagana. If you could do that, then that'll be great. I didn't want to butt heads with Hagana over profits. Even if we only particularly disagreed on something, I didn't think she'd be the type to back off. but how? Huh? Lisa asked me with a truly puzzled face from across the table. Who in the world did you meet? I intentionally scuffed down my meal with my mouth open wide and didn't reply. She'd probably hate me if I told her it was an arrogant resident of a greed-laden district. Nor did Lisa push on any further. Thanks for the meal. Having said that, I forcefully ended the conversation. The next day, Hagana accepted the compensation terms readily and relayed them to Chris over the phone. They too accepted readily. The terms could be illustrated thus. Let's say we took in the 30,000 mould and double its worth. Then 6,000 mouls, 20% of the 30,000 moul profit, would be paid out to us as compensation, out of which I'd pay Hagana's share from the programming and retain 4,800 mouls for myself. The small reward wasn't bad. On top of that, I was more insistent on this additional term to the agreement. That is, if we should lose money, then we wouldn't be held accountable. Anyhow, we weren't the ones who broached the subject initially. It'd be too much to then hold us accountable for losses. They wanted to gamble, not us. Chris's dad was so huge he made Barton look like a midget, and he had the dignity of a laborer. Still, he accepted all of my demands and bowed deeply. Lisa had a sour look on her face, but it was we who had the skills and means. Being able to monetize such a skill to the maximum extent was a totally natural thing to do, I told myself proudly. Besides, Hagana didn't even have an ounce of the talk of compensation and what happened to losses in her head. Instead of that, while staring at the 30,000 mouls Chris's dad brought, she muttered forcefully, I'll make it grow. Lots. Hagana was right. I had gotten noticed by Barton, so it wasn't the time to be making lazy trades either. However, I myself was surprised at the fact that I didn't have to get worked up over Hagana's comment, let alone worry about it. Hagana's program was that good. With the exception of a few minutes a day, it was constantly monitoring and analyzing 1,000 stocks on the virtual market and 40,000 stocks on the real one. It was more accurate and performant than me trying to flip rapidly back and forth between all these various displays until my eyes dried out. It could perform calculations similar to what I can by staring at a single stock, but it can do that on many stocks in a fraction of a second. Furthermore, the statistical spread that I'd only vaguely understood could be more calculated exactly, and it shortened the amount of time I had to spend per stock. Better still, I had stopped chasing stocks that had lopsided investment structures or felt strange to me. Hagana's program could find one more money tree after another without my needing to chase after dangerous stocks, so there was no point in taking the additional risk. My main workflow turned into buying and selling according to the program's instructions, then relaying what went well and what went poorly back to Hagana. Next to me would be Hagana, puzzling over the results and solving arcane equations by hand, but I would have stopped asking her day after day what she was doing. I've stopped asking. As days passed, the number of Greek letters in Hagana's electronic notebook increased. Beta, Gamma, Delta, Theta, Kappa. All of them had mathematical meanings, but the only one I could understand was Alpha. Amongst all of the mind-boggling Greek letters that populated investment theory, Alpha was one which had a simple and clear meaning. It was simply how much better you were performing over the market average. There wasn't one thing more boring in the world than investing than the market average. Any monkey with money would be able to perform as well as the market average by investing a little into every stock on the market. Anyone with a brain would instantly understand that taking care to avoid falling stocks would lead to easily winning over the market average. Alpha was an indicator of how much smarter you were than a monkey. My alpha value had its ups and downs. However, Agana was trying to establish with her formulas a way for me to keep my alpha consistently at my highest levels. It wouldn't be affected by my health, the situation, or my mood. She was working out constant best performance using formulas. Consistent, sorry, I misread that. Agana was sitting next to me, converting everything I did into formulas. Therefore, the more refined the program got, the more free time I got, and the more free time I got, the more I could trade calmly. Once I started trading calmly, I realized there were many things I didn't see before, and many things I didn't have time to feel out. Maybe the reason for my slump before was teaming up with Agana, that I didn't have enough breathing room. It was probably like sharpening a knife to the point where the edge would be all chipped. If I had to say one thing I wasn't too happy with, it was probably that Agana's program was so good that I stopped living on the edge while trading. If I had time to get involved in dangerous stunts, it was better to spend the time to earn money safely. Reading the news, looking at the company's financial affairs, taking in the mood of the market, it wouldn't be strange to say that all-for-nothing trades were big gambles. Besides, right now we were entrusted with other people's money. We were already hitting it big, so there was no reason to take such dangerous risks. Thus, I laughingly dismissed my thoughts of it being boring and empty as useless childish worries. My funds increased further over the week. I had 47 million moles in the virtual market, and 92,000 in the real market. With a 30% increase, Chris's dad's part had increased to an amount just short of 40,000 moles. It wasn't a bad result on its own, but we were still far from resolving the debt situation. I had made haughty demands to Chris's dad, saying that I'd keep 20% of the gains and wouldn't take responsibility for losses. However, I was a little unsure whether the profits here would live up to my arrogance. A week after we took in her family's savings, Chris came by nervously to ask about the results. Chris was uneasy, but I think I was more uneasy. In front of an uneasy Chris, Agana laid out the numbers. It has gone up to 39,200 moles. Agana was stately in her proclamation, as she was as stately as she was confident in her outcome. Chris was apparently way smarter than you could ever imagine from how silly she appeared. Therefore, she should have been able to realize that they were still far off from paying their debts, given that there was only a 30% increase. With those haughty demands I thrust at them, it would have been expected that I would have gotten at least halfway to the final goal. While thinking about how Chris might pick up on that and tell me off, Chris, who looked like a curly-haired puppy, looked at Agana while trembling. Is that true? It's the truth. And then her legs gave way. I extended my arms hurriedly, but Agana was quicker to get down. What I said is the truth. Agana said that to Chris with a gentle expression on her face. She then took Chris's hands and squeezed them tightly. Chris stared blankly at her hands and then at Agana's face in front of her. I can't believe what's happened, was written all over Chris's face. What I said is the truth. Agana repeated herself. But being able to pay off the loan was still a ways off. The 30,000 moles was what little Chris's dad could wring out as their last hope. And to take in that money under such haughty demands, while not even making 70% of the goal was something I had confidence in, I felt a bit guilty. And because of this, my line of thinking, seeing Chris's surprising reaction, may have made me think of something immature. I pondered that not being able to see the picture and calculate gains and losses properly was why the poor would always remain poor. Staying in poverty meant that they didn't have any technical skills and talents. All they could sell was their time. Since all living beings had the same amount of time available to them, their time was cheap. People with technical skills could get more money for their time, and people with innate talents were rarer and thus fetched on an even higher price for their time. However, that road topped out with doctors and lawyers. To get over that hump, one would have someone else do the work. In other words, one would have to become a businessman. However, one didn't have to just get people to work. One could also get money itself to work. Therefore, paying off just the interest little by little like Lisa would have normally been a dead end. To break out of poverty meant to take the opposite road, trusting the nest egg to us and then being surprised that just a 30% increase was not the way to go. Those were my thoughts as I stared arrogantly down at Chris. However, Hasekura said the following. It's true, so you could buy shoes and clothes with the earned money. My jaw dropped unexpectedly, and from here on, it's just going to go up even more. You could buy shoes, clothes, and bags, and I think there'd still be money left over. This isn't something to cry over. No, I was crying. And then Chris burst out crying, and Hasekura was unusually flustered. However, the person most flustered by this was probably me. Hasekura's words pierced deeply into my heart. You can buy clothes and shoes? She didn't say that the money wasn't enough to pay off the debt yet. Rather, she said something more disgustingly practical. Chris's clothing was in various sizing that didn't fit her, and her shoes were whole field sneakers that were even a worse of a fit. Telling her that it was better to buy something to replace them would have been a ridiculously obvious thing to say. And yet I didn't realize it until she had said it. It totally didn't enter my mind at all. To Chris and Hasekura, money was just that. It was the reverse of when I thrust those bills at Hasekura, saying what I said was the truth. Again, I failed to realize what money actually was. I didn't understand what it meant to make money in order to live. Before I stumbled into this church, I had certainly used the money I earned to pay for board, but that was simply a matter of saving up money like my family could. You can buy clothing and shoes. That was something dead obvious. For me, that statement only entered my mind when I was considering how I could save money. Ever since I was born, I had never had a situation where I couldn't buy something, even if I really wanted it. There were things I took for granted. Chris and Hasekura lived in a different world. Chris? Hasekura called out her name. Hasekura's emotionless expression was, in other words, the totally serious expression she'd always wear. I'll make it grow more. Rather than just plain crying, Chris was sobbing, staring at Hasekura as if she had come across the savior of the world. Hasekura nodded slowly, and then, raising one hand, she pointed at me. Hal is going to make it grow for us. What? I was flurried at the sudden mention, but Chris looked at me with trusting eyes. She had beautiful blue eyes. Staring into those eyes made me feel dirty about thinking all those bad things about her. I had recoiled, and Chris roughly wiped her face with her sleeves. Although she was sitting on the ground, she straightened herself and looked at me straight in the eye. We place ourselves in your care. That was her polite statement. This was what we were really doing.